My Govanen, welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and the War of the Rohirrim trailer finally dropped, and as usual I'm late to the party because my life is such that I don't have the time to just drop everything and do a video, but I did want to give my thoughts on it, so here they are in belated fashion. Now, before I get started, I do want to apologize in advance because I think this is going to get a little bit choppy. My computer is not the most powerful thing on the planet, and so I think when I start running this video based on my prior test, this is going to kind of unsync the audio and video of my actual video. So unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit off as far as the technical, but it'll still work, I think. So with that said, let's take a look at this and see what we think. So, right off the bat, the fact that they're just starting with two tower scenes as member berries doesn't exactly thrill me.
All Middle-earth knows the tale of the War of the Ring, but 200 years before that,
Riders of the Mark! Brothers of Rohan!
there was an older tale.
Arise!
So this is all pretty generic. I will say, like, the art form, I'm not a huge fan of anime in general. My idea of good art is, very much from the 90s. I grew up watching Batman the Animated Series, a lot of the 90s Disney movies like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. To me, that's kind of like my ideal art style for this kind of thing. This is not the worst type of anime for me personally, but, it's a matter of personal taste no matter how you look at it. So I'll just leave that there.
We come with an offer to strengthen Rohan.
So right off the bat, I notice, of course, that Metacelled actually looks like Metacelled from the Peter Jackson trilogy, which that's fine. Like I mentioned, member berries at the beginning, but I don't mind it looking the same as far as the actual art and production and all that stuff. To be consistent with it, I just think it's kind of silly that they started off with actual scenes from the two towers. It's like, okay, we didn't need to have that. You could have just said from the creative team that gave you, as far as this right here, this, for those of you not familiar with the story that this movie is supposed to be telling, I'm going to spoil just a couple things about it, but this is this line here that we've come to, with an offer to strengthen Rohan, kind of does fit because the Dunlending leader was trying to be a little bit sly, and not exactly 100% sly because I think it was a little more overt, but trying to get in with the royal family of Rohan somewhat through coercion in some ways, not even so much through deception. And it's not exactly clear from the trailer how much of this is going to be deception versus, kind of extortion. But this idea that it was kind of a backhanded attempt to get in power is definitely kind of accurate. And I do like how they've given the Dunlendings kind of their own look, and, I don't have any particular problems with that so far.
Hera, daughter of Helm, I, Wolf, seek your hand in marriage.
Our fathers speak as if I were not even in the room.
Alright, so this is a very old trope at this point in movies, and one which I am not a huge fan of. Not so much because the trope itself is a problem, but because it kind of tells us where this movie is going, and it'll be more apparent as we get through more of the trailer. This idea that, they're brokering her marriage without her consent. It's been done in Brave, it's been done in, I don't even know how many movies. And it's getting kind of annoying at this point because, yes, this is a kind of a plot point that leads to what happens later in this story, even in Tolkien's version, which is in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings. But it's not all about the daughter. And that's kind of where this trailer seems to be going. This trailer makes it seem like the whole story revolves around the daughter, which is really not the case. And so it's kind of annoying that they're going to focus all this attention on this one point, especially since I said it's kind of a tired old trope at this point. So many movies have done this. We don't need to. We can make this story be about what this story is supposed to be about, and that is supposed to be something different. We can recognize that for our modern sensibilities, an arranged marriage is something kind of uncomfortable, but we can also acknowledge that in pre-modern times, arranged marriages were kind of the norm in a lot of ways. And we could let that just be and not make an issue out of it. And the drama of what's going on in this story, which is the Dunlendings trying to kind of force their way into the power position in Rohan by, means of this kind of marriage, that's still the drama, whether or not we care whether it's an arranged marriage or a marriage by agreement of the actual marriage parties. I mean, we don't need to have this other element of, look at how bad this is. I'm being forced to marry, whether or not I want to, I mean, we get it. That's a thing that we moderns think is important, but can we just let this story be about what it's supposed to be about and not import that modern sensibility into it like we've done with every other movie about the medieval era where there's an arranged marriage? It's just so unnecessary. But like I said, what the real issue is, not only does it do this little tired trope, but it's going to become very apparent that Hera, who is not even named in the actual story in the appendices, is going to be apparently the main character and a huge focus of this movie, which I think is a mistake.
I do not want to marry you.
You do not seek an alliance. You seek a throne. You will live to regret this, old man. He's dead.
Now, I don't remember from the appendices if the Dunlending leader actually struck first. I think he really only attacked with words, and then Helm Hammerhand smushed him. But this is basically accurate as far as the fact that Helm hits him one time and kills him. I mean, that's why he's named Helm Hammerhand. And by the way, that's the reason why this is an interesting story is because of Helm and who he is. In the appendices, this story is mainly important because it gives us a backdrop for why Helm's Deep is called what it is, why the Horn of Helm Hammerhand is important, and also it explains part of the story of the kings of Rohan, because when we come and we see the burial mounds in Peter Jackson's trilogy, we see Theodred get put into one of them. But in Tolkien's actual work, it brings to our attention the fact that they're on two sides of the road, and it represents that the fact that the line of kings was broken. And it becomes broken, and here's a story element that's a little bit of a spoiler. Helm is going to die as a result of this storyline, and he's going to die without any male heirs. His nephew, Freylof, is going to become the next king of Rohan and start a new line, which then starts getting buried on the other side of the road, which is, explains that plot point. Or not so much plot point, but, explains that detail. So this whole business of Helm's story is important mainly because it gives us this background for what happens in The Lord of the Rings, these details that we see, but it also does this thing which Tolkien does very frequently, which is create a rhyming history, because what's going to happen to Theoden is basically the exact same thing that happens to Helm. Helm dies as a part of the war. Theoden dies as a part of the war. Both of them fail to leave any male heirs, and therefore their nephews take over as the next king. Tolkien does this all the time. He's got a second Faramir that he creates in the history of Gondor, who goes off and fights in disguise, much like Éowyn does, which kind of gives a rhyming history to both elements of their love story. And he does this with a lot of different things, too. So the point here being, Helm's story is interesting mainly because of these elements, and kind of also just the drama of, this is the kind of history that Rohan has, and also the drama of this is how important Helm's Deep is to them. It's not important to us because of Helm's daughter, who is not named in the story. So, this part, with him killing the guy in one blow, that's all nice and good, but this is almost all we'll see of Helm, but for one last little brief moment that we'll see him again later.
You will pay for this with your life.
The boy I knew would never wish for war.
The boy you knew is gone.
Now, see, this part to me is kind of strange because there's absolutely no reason to think that the daughter of the King of Rohan and the son of the leader of the Dunlendings would be childhood friends. The Dunlendings and the Rohirrim have never been on very friendly terms. When Gondor gave Rohan, or what was then Calanarthon, to the Rohirrim, who were at that time just the Eorlings, they basically displaced the Dunlendings, and the Dunlendings have had a kind of revenge streak against Rohan for ever since then. So this idea that they would have grown up playing together is really contrary to the whole idea that we get in the appendices in the Lord of the Rings itself. The Dunlendings hate, like at the level of racial hatred. They call the Rohirrim the Straw Hats or something like that because of their golden hair. So they have racial epithets for these people. They hate them so bad. So the idea that they would grow up and be playing together at any level is just really not according to the story. So I don't really like that. And again, it's giving just this additional, it seems like this is also a trope that gets overused. Childhood friends grow up apart and then end up being enemies. It's like we didn't need to throw that in there to have the drama. So, yeah, I just not a huge fan of that.
There's so many of them. I pledge to fight for my king.
By the way, why is there an Oliphant in this movie? We're not fighting Easterlings or Haradrim. We're not fighting, anybody from anywhere that would have Oliphants. It doesn't make any sense. And we're going to see another one too, by the way.
I'm the fastest rider you have.
All right, so here again, this is where we get this more of this business of Hera being kind of the main character. We're seeing a lot of her visually, but we're also getting a lot of her lines. And we get this line, "I'm the fastest rider you have. I will fight in the war." It's kind of combining points of Éowyn from the Peter Jackson movies, because it's the whole "you know nothing of war," which is kind of what Éomer says a little bit subliminally to Éowyn, because he says war is the province of men, and he says you know as little of war as that hobbit. So that part isn't quite as subliminal. But the other thing about it was that she's also picking up kind of Arwen vibes, because in the Peter Jackson trilogy, when Arwen finds Aragorn and then decides to take Frodo, it's like, I will take Frodo, and Aragorn's, no, let me do it. It's not safe. And she's like, I'm the better rider. Why is it in Peter Jackson's Middle Earth that females are always better riders than men? I mean, I could understand, physically speaking, like horses are going to be faster if they're carrying a lighter person, and she's smaller because she's a woman, but really? Does it have to be that the woman is the best rider every time, Pete? It doesn't make any sense. It's just, again, they're just making Hera the main character and making her... I really hope they don't make her just a Mary Sue, but it doesn't exactly seem like they're shying away from that for sure. And they're doing the same old thing with Éowyn and Theoden and Éomer, where it's like, no, I need you to do this, which is not fight in the war. It's like, no, that's not fair. And man, just don't do it. Don't go there.
People need hope, Hera. Something to believe in.
Why is there a great eagle? We don't ever learn anything about this from the trailer, but again, it's like we're importing all these member berries. There's the Oliphant, there's the eagle, there's, all these references to things that are in the Lord of the Rings proper, not at all connected to this story. It does not encourage me. And there we had another Oliphant, which is not great. I don't know what this is supposed to be, like a watcher in the water with a tree growing on it. Which, again, member berries. Member berries. It's all member berries. Why is there an Oliphant? Where has she gone? Or what is going on here? Why is there a giant octopus creature that looks exactly like the watcher in the water 200 years before anything like that should be happening? I mean, Gandalf had been to Moria recently enough in The Lord of the Rings that was a new thing. Now, you'd have to read the book to get this. It's not clear in the movie. But the point being, there is no Watcher in the Water 200 years before The Lord of the Rings happens. That's not a thing. So why there's one here and wherever here is, I mean, it's not really clear where Hera is at that point in the story. But is she just going off on this solo adventure to do what? Something? Get help? Or I don't know. It doesn't make any sense why she's not just in Rohan unless she's going off maybe to Gondor to enlist help or something like that. But if she's going to Gondor, there's no reason she'd run into Oliphants, and there's certainly no reason she'd run into that creature. So again, it just seems like they're throwing all this Lord of the Rings stuff in here. And bear in mind, this is the trailer. They're trying to generate excitement for the movie. So it's not like all that stuff is going to be a huge part of the movie necessarily. But they're basically trying to tell us in this trailer, it's like, look, it's Lord of the Rings again. I don't want Lord of the Rings again. I wanted you to tell me this story, because this story has its own worthwhile drama and whatever that I want to experience. I didn't want to experience the Lord of the Rings again. This is one of the problems I had with Rings of Power, was it was constantly throwing in all these little nuggets that were just references to the movies. Always follow your nose and, this other stuff. It's like, just leave that bloody well alone, tell your own story, and stop relying on popular stuff to build up your own thing. Make your own thing good, and people will like it. You shouldn't... Like, there were plenty of people who, before we knew anything, before we saw any artwork, before we knew anything about Hera even being a character, there were people who were so excited for this movie because it was an interesting story that people wanted to hear. They didn't want to hear it because they thought, ooh, we're going to get giant eagles and a Watcher in the Water and Oliphants and all these things again. That's not why they were excited. They were excited because of this story in the appendices. So the fact that they're trying to sell this movie to us by saying, ooh, look, Lord of the Rings thing, Lord of the Rings thing, Lord of the Rings thing, Lord of the Rings things, like... Did you make a good movie, or are you just really throwing member berries at us? Okay, and this one I hate too. I really hate this line. This is the last we hear from Helm, and it's, he calls her his pride and says, you could rule the world. First of all, that is blanket nonsense. There is no possible way that anybody from Rohan could rule the world. Rohan is not a superpower in the world of Middle-earth. And this idea that Hera is just such a overpowering character in her own right by herself that she could, wield that much charisma and whatever and get everybody to basically... I don't know what he's trying to say here because we don't have the context, really. But this idea is just so ludicrous. And also, the Rohirrim would not have had any kind of aspirations to rule the world. That's just a stupid... The Rohirrim, when they weren't even the Rohirrim at the time, came to aid Gondor in one of their wars under the ruling stewards. They helped them win the war, and as a result of the war, Gondor was super depopulated, and so the ruling steward said, look, I'll give you this land that we call Kalanarthon to be your own land if you agree to be in a perpetual alliance with us. And so Rohan has always been not exactly a vassal state, but a kind of junior partner in an alliance. And they're in some ways kind of subject to Gondor in the sense that they owe Gondor an allegiance that Gondor doesn't owe them. So this idea that they would even be thinking in terms of ruling the world is just so not consonant with the way that the Rohirrim would even be thinking about this. So I am not comfortable with that line. Now maybe the context kind of saves it, but I just, again, it seems to be putting way too much weight on Hera's character. And again, girl boss fighting, being apparently an equal match for a guy who's probably trained for war all his life. And she's doing it in what looks like a wedding dress. Which, I'm sorry, that's just so goofy to me. And this whole business of, they're basically just turning Hera into a girl boss. And I'm not even saying that in the sense of, like, the politics of the whole thing. I don't mind a woman character being a warrior or something, but you have to remember the context of this story. Again, yes, Rohan had shield maidens. Yes, we know that women were capable of fighting, and we know that that actually, in fact, happened in history. But again, they're making this the central drama. It's about her personality versus Wolf's personality, and it's not about the extreme suffering that the people of Rohan went through during this war, because I don't want to spoil too much. The reason Helm's Deep is called Helm's Deep is because they end up in a siege and they're all holed up in there during the winter when there's not much food. And some of the interesting stories about Helm come from that period. And that we even see her, sounding what is apparently Helm's horn. And it's just like everything interesting that happens in this trailer almost is her doing something cool. I did not get excited for this movie because I thought that I was going to see Helm's daughter do all the cool things for 90% of the movie runtime. That's not what I'm here for. It's just like, and by the way, I kind of missed it, but there was a point in this trailer where she's walking and it shows her with these super high, mid-thigh high boots. And it kind of makes her look like a character out of a Final Fantasy game rather than something out of what you would think would be culturally appropriate for Rohan. So not all of the artistic choices am I happy with. But let's just finish this up. What does Mordor want with rings? And this is more or less the perfect way to cap this off. If by perfect you mean, sarcastically, you just put the final nail in the coffin. Because again, we don't need references to the Lord of the Rings. We don't need them. This is supposed to be a story about Rohan and their cultural historical background to give us some idea of who they are. This whole thing of throwing in a reference to Mordor wanting rings, I'd have to look at the appendices to know if Sauron was even active as the necromancer at this point. I'm not sure he was. But even if he was, why would there be any element of that in this movie? There's no real connection to Rohan as far as where Sauron is searching or what he's trying to do to find the rings. There's no reason that would be happening in Rohan, which again, maybe this happens elsewhere because Hera goes off on a solo adventure way afield of Rohan for reasons unknown. But again, like, just one thing after another in this trailer is like, hey, look, we're a Lord of the Rings movie. It's like, stop it. I didn't want a Lord of the Rings movie. If I wanted to watch Lord of the Rings, I would jolly well watch Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings again. Or maybe even watch the rank and pass, because at least that is the Lord of the Rings, and it's animated, and better animation, by the way, because Studio Ghibli was awesome. But the whole business here of, throwing this in as the last thing, like this is somehow going to connect to, the Lord of the Rings. It's connected in a loose sense because it's the history of the people of Rohan, who are a major player in the War of the Ring, but my goodness, there's no reason to throw that in here. And it's just annoying me to no end how much reliance they are placing in this trailer on references to the movies. So, just to kind of wrap up my thoughts here, the big problems that I have could mostly be taken care of if the trailer is actually focusing way more on certain things in the trailer itself than the movie will focus on. If we actually don't spend that much time with Hera and, she just happens to do some really, really crazy things, but also we spend a lot of time with Helm, cool. And they just didn't have a lot of interesting stuff maybe from Helm's side of the story to show in a trailer that was exciting, But if that's true, that's still a problem in the sense that I don't want the attention being just constantly shifted away from Helm or wanting to constantly go back to the Hera storyline because that's the more exciting and entertaining half of the movie. No, I want the Helm story to be the thing that is, both entertaining and interesting about this movie because that was the point. So the trailer has this major twofold problem, one of which is it seems like Hera is going to be the main character and she's going to do all the things and she's going to be a girl boss who is a pastiche of Eowyn and Arwen and who is cool and does all the things. That's not why I wanted to see this story on film. Like, if you want to make a movie like that, there's tons of them out there. You could just make your own story and not be a Lord of the Rings connected thing or something that Tolkien wrote, or if you can get the rights to it, go get, the story of Haleth. Get the story of Haleth. Get the rights to that, and you can, really actually do like a Tolkien straight-up girl boss. Or you can find other ways to do this sort of thing. But that's not what this story is. And, just like Rings of Power turned out to be a giant piece of fan fiction with virtually no connection except for geography and names to Tolkien's original writings, I'm worried that that's pretty much what we're going to get here, is it's going to be the setting and then just a bunch of fan fiction. It's like, okay, and maybe it'll be good fan fiction, but it's still going to be just fan fiction, not an adaptation of what I wanted to see. Now, in fairness, the appendices give us a very short, condensed story, so you would have to find ways to fill up screen time no matter what you did. But you could do it without choosing to go down this route of making the main character somebody who's not even named in the text, who is a female, and therefore just imposing this whole idea of feminism on this. Now, again, I am not enraged at the idea of females doing cool things. Tolkien does some of that in his own writings, and I've already talked before in a video about how Eowyn is not the kind of feminist icon that people think she is, and it's also not a smackdown of feminism in itself that she in the book ends up with Faramir and changes her whole outlook to being into gardening and healing, because from Tolkien's perspective, those are kind of some of the higher things that men do too. Faramir praises, Sam and says that the Shire must be a great realm where gardeners are honored. This is a thing that Faramir thinks is a worthy calling for a man. It's not just a thing that women do while men go off and do all the cool battle stuff, right? Tolkien's whole idea, and I tend to agree with him, is that war, and he says this again through Faramir, war must be, and therefore we must be willing to fight it, but we shouldn't glory in it, because fighting is not in and of itself a good thing. A good thing to actually be happy about in and of itself is peace and being able to do those things. I say this just to point out the fact that when I'm ranting about Hera being this girl boss character, that's the perspective I'm coming from. Tolkien didn't think girl bosses were bad because girls shouldn't do that. He thought girl bosses were bad because men bosses are bad too. One of Boromir's faults is that he glories too much in being a warrior. This is not a healthy thing in Tolkien's mind, or in my mind. Yes, sometimes we have to have warriors, and we need them to be good at what they do. That does not mean they should take a lot of their identity from that and make that their whole thing. So this idea that Hera is apparently going to be that person is really annoying. It's not Tolkien. It's not even what the story's supposed to be about. And then the other problem besides her being a girl boss, which doesn't really fit, is all the member berries. We've got the eagle, we've got the Oliphant, we've got the Watcher in the Water, we've got rings. Give it a rest. You made Lord of the Rings, and then you made 3 Hobbit movies all about the ring. It's like, just stop it. Stop it. We don't need that. That's not what we're here for. Now, if you wanted to make a movie about, the making of the rings or something else like Rings of Power is doing, then, fine, do that. But this story is not about the rings in any way at all. So why are we talking about all this Lord of the Rings stuff? We don't need Oliphants. We don't need great eagles. We don't need... It's supposed to be a drama about Rohan at war with another people and all that comes of that. And that's it. And that's all we need. Yeah, you have to fill it up to get enough screen time to make it worth being a movie, but you don't have to throw in every stinking Lord of the Rings trope that you can just to make that a entertaining movie. That's totally unnecessary, and it's, like I said, not encouraging that they went down this road. So, am I going to watch the movie? Yes, I'm going to watch the movie. Am I anticipating that it's going to live up to my initial hopes? No, I am not. It might still be very entertaining, but it doesn't look like it's going to be very Tolkien. And to me, that is, the reason that I decided I was not going to watch Rings of Power after the first season is because it's not Tolkien. They're not really adapting Tolkien. They're just writing fan fiction. And if you want to write fan fiction, that's fine, but I'm not going to encourage that by participating in it. I am going to spend my time actually reading, watching, listening to adaptations of the material that are actually pretty close to what Tolkien wrote, because that's what I'm interested in. Now, if you're interested in fan fiction, you go do that, but I've never been a fan fiction type of guy, and so that's why I'm just not interested in it. So I really hope this movie isn't just like 90% fan fiction. I have a feeling it will be, unfortunately. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not encouraged by this trailer. Oh, an extra tidbit, this trailer was the US trailer. Apparently there's a Japanese trailer where Saruman gets kind of teased, and I don't have a problem with that, by the way. It kind of makes sense, but the whole idea of throwing Saruman in here is, again, kind of leaning in that direction of member berries a little bit, so it kind of depends on how they handle him. But I thought I'd just throw that in there because apparently that's a thing. I haven't watched the Japanese trailer, but that's what I've seen on the internet. So that might be interesting, or it might not. But it, again, fits the kind of general feel of why on earth are we throwing in all the member berries? This is one that would actually make sense to have in the story in some way, but that doesn't mean that they aren't going to just milk it just for, their own purposes. So those are my thoughts on the trailer. What does everybody else think about this? Do you have your own, positive or negative ideas? Throw them in the comments. We could have a discussion. If you liked my rant and rave about this whole thing, give it a thumbs up, share it around. Make sure you subscribe to catch my future content. If you're on YouTube, make sure you click the bell icon. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter for Tolkien trivia questions every week, and check the description below for other support and social links. And until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore Channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially Nathan Dufour, Paul Leone, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.